Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another week of the At the Movies Aftershow. Jodi, thanks for coming, and after what an amazing talk this weekend, thanks for coming and joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so you're watching Crazy Rich Asians, which spoiler alert to everyone, that was our movie this weekend. You're watching that, and I'm sure it was a real a hard one to watch. Actually, are you a rom com person?
I could do a rom-com as long as there's actual com in it. If it's
Oh,
just the rom, you're gonna lose. Like I'm the one who loves all the cheeseball 90s Adam Sandler movies. Like that frat boy
yeah,
sense of humor that is very inappropriate. Like that's my jam. So
yeah.
as long as there's enough comedy in it, you're gonna get me to watch it for sure.
So the Aquafina sections, those were your jam. Yeah,
Yes.
cool.
Yes.
It is actually so Crazy Rich Asians is probably one of my favorite rom coms because I think it actually is legitimately funny, and also combines like a lot of like heart that feels not forced. And so I was excited
Mm.
when we were doing this. Um, when you were watching it, what was your process like for pulling out some themes and some meanings as you're trying to make a message based off of it?
Well, I have to like so true confessional. I had to go back and watch it, but I originally saw it when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever it's worth, had much discussion with a bunch of friends who just happen to be Asian to go, how much a part of your culture is this? Or laughing over places that I had personally experienced their culture. Most people, I think I've shared before, I lived in Los Angeles for a bunch of years. And when I was there, it's a very international city, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't planned or intended. It just randomly happened that the group of friends I had, it was me and one other white girl, and everybody else was Asian.
Mm-hmm.
So all that to say, it's different when you can go to a Korean restaurant and have somebody order barbecue for you in Korean,
Mm-hmm.
or it's different to go to a Japanese restaurant with somebody who is that, or to be welcomed to one of my best friends' homes and get my first red envelope for Chinese New Year. And I'm like, now I can never spend this, or I'm supposed to spend this, and where does the luck part come in? So, all that to say, as you saw Rachel, the main character, trying to navigate some of the cultural differences, there was parts of that that I resonate where you just don't know what you don't know, and
Yeah.
you're stepping on toes. And I was grateful to have just loving relationships and people who thought it was a hoot that I was even curious, especially being in the majority as a white person, where I think it's fascinating to learn cultural heritage and to learn traditions. And you just saw Rachel not offered any grace at all.
Mm.
So I kind of loosely remembered that part of it and how it generated conversation, real conversation amongst my friends. And then it gave me the reason to go back and rewatch it again and go, let's just see. And then when you do, especially with the filter of some of the topics that we did end up talking about, it was like, oh, the underbelly here and some of the comments that the mother-in-law makes are much more cutting
Mm.
than I had realized the first go around when you're focused on, like I said, more the comedy side of things. And that's when I started to go, because, quite frankly, like I'm the only girl teacher. I don't know. I don't want to get pigeonholed to do the only rom-com we're doing. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, wait a minute. This is way deeper, and we all need to care about this because we're all, whether it's intentionally or inadvertently, doing this in pieces of our lives, and let's call that out. And that's where it harkens back to the whole point of this series of, just like Jesus used parables, gosh, stories are good, and they
Mm.
wake us up to stuff in ways that we otherwise wouldn't. So when I went back and watched it the second time, that's when my heart kind of sank, and you get that pit in your stomach and you're like, yeah, there's enough, we got to talk about this, there's enough there for sure.
Mm. I'm curious. You mentioned you had a lot of those conversations with your friends earlier on, and maybe it's like back and you're like, oh, I don't really fully remember those. But I'm curious, as you had those conversations, were there any things that were like, uh, I don't know, maybe it can be challenging, I think, when you don't know a culture or
Mhm.
to ask questions about people's culture, right? Because you don't want to say the wrong thing, or
Yeah.
you don't even know that you are saying the wrong thing, and like, hey, a general sensitivity is really helpful there. Is there any? I guess, guidance you'd give for people that are like, oh, I'm curious about this culture. I know it's super helpful to know more about different cultures, but how do I even start those conversations?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Um, I will say for me, the biggest gift I was given was the intimacy of friendship and knowing it was a safe environment
Yeah.
to ask anything.
Yeah.
And I am also certain that there were times that I didn't know the right words to use, or if something had a specific name in a language or within the culture, if it was referred to in a specific way. My best girlfriend is Chinese Filipino. And so then there's stuff you'll hear culturally, even in Mandarin, but she speaks Tagalog, which is the language in the Philippines. So, even that is nuanced. She's Chinese, but she's Chinese Filipino. And
Yeah.
what does that mean? So you're going to get it wrong if you are not that culture. I think you go in assuming that,
Yeah.
but that necessitates a posture of humility.
Mm.
And I would even go into some of the conversations. And again, these are close friends, but still saying, I'm not going to get this right, but hear the question that I'm asking and not exactly the words that I'm using. Um, and then I think the gift of that is there were times where, especially the ones who were maybe like the friend I'm thinking about in particular had moved here as a child, and there were
Mhm.
still some colloquialisms or American culture things that she didn't know.
Mm.
And because you're assumed to know it, and it's a part of the white culture, which is the mass culture in this country right now, at least, she was embarrassed to ask. And then it opened up
Mm.
a whole different layer of, well, what does this saying mean? And what does that saying mean? And to try to explain some of those things like, oh, this is, the pot calling the kettle black. Well, what does that mean? Right.
Yeah.
And so we got to serve each other, which led to this whole different freedom in our relationship to laugh and then
Yeah.
also to share vulnerabilities. And I think the laughing part was so important to not take each other too seriously. And my commitment to all of these friends was, hey, I am from the suburbs and very white suburbs, and I have not tried sea urchin before, and I'm not sure I'm going to, but I'm at least going to try to put it on my plate and take a bite. But if something goes horribly wrong, just just forgive me. So, I think you go along for the ride with a candor as friends, or
Yeah.
at least acquaintances, where you have enough relationship built up that you can ask, and then you just give each other lots of grace. But
Mm.
for me, it started with really calling it out and going, I might get this wrong as I ask it, but I'm asking it from a place of true curiosity. I want to learn more about you. And I see value in your story. And part of your story is this piece of you. And so
Mm.
I want to understand it more. Every single time, that was well received, every single time.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like the foundation of friendship is crucial. And then I think it sounds like the heart of, I love your statement. Like, yeah, I'm going to get this wrong. Thanks for being willing to let me get it wrong so that I can learn to get it right. And I think that really only does work within the confines of like quality friendship and relationship, because otherwise it's, and we all know this, right? We have more grace with our friends because they've earned that in our lives by showing that we're there to actually be their friend. And like you said, we want to know because it helps us be a better friend, helps us care more, helps us be more rounded individuals. Not because we're trying to, it's not because it's what we're supposed to do. um, for those of you listening, there was some air quotes there, but okay. So one of the main takeaways you were talking about was favoritism, and I love that you brought that up because I feel like favoritism is one of those little subtle hidden things.
Mm.
Um, at times, I guess it can be hidden. Times less so, that we don't talk about a ton. I mean, I think we often we'll talk about its most harsh forms, you know, and what I think favoritism becomes. But I think favoritism is often the starting point for a lot of other really hard things. And I'm curious, was there anything, as you were thinking about this, was there anything practical that you think that we can do to really kind of root out favoritism in our own lives?
Yeah, and I'd push back a little bit on the question too, to say sometimes favoritism in and of itself is evil and
Mm,
can be sinful. And it doesn't have to go deeper than that, because when it attaches preference to worth of an individual, that's a red flag, in my
mm,
opinion. And you can joke about, oh, every parent's got a favorite kid, ha ha ha. And we all kind of do that, at least in my family. We do, where there's multiple kids. And that's fun, right? Like that's to poke at each other. But the reality is, I would guess most people have experienced a true situation where all of a sudden something you could not control was essentially used against you.
mm.
And it just is such a vulnerable way to weaponize a characteristic of somebody.
Yeah.
And that's where the evil and sin come in for me. And so how, we talked about how to guard against it and how God sees value in each one of us because he's created each one of us with specificity and intention and in his image. I think the other piece of that to remember is it's easy to forget if you kind of get on your bully pulpit of being holier than thou. And
Mm,
for me, one of the best ways to avoid that is to remember the before Jesus me.
mm,
And the farther you, at least mentally, get away from that and assume grace and assume mercy and assume kindness and goodness from God, or in all relationships, right? Um, the more entitled you become, when in reality, none of us are worthy of God's favor. That is a gift he gives us. Um, and really the grace involved is where the rules change. And so as long as we really focus on, at least for me, from that heart of it, that we can never be worthy of it, it makes it easier to extend it to others and to keep your right perspective.
mm. What's what's the healthy version of that, right? Because I think, and let's, I feel like typically most people sit into one camp or the other. They're either really good at acknowledging that they fall short of things, and
Mm,
maybe it's almost to the point of like, um, yeah, like there's just some self confidence or self assurance or just their own self image has almost gone too far to where they're almost like they dwell on it too much. There's a lot there. So
pride, yeah,
please, yeah,
ego.
please don't hear that in a flippant way. But there's like a quick weight to that. And then there's the other side, which is I think the yes, the holier than thou, the not I can do no wrong, but I don't think of myself as being wrong often. The I'll extend grace to somewhere else, someone I'll extend grace to myself, but not to someone else type of.
Yeah.
What's that? How do you? And maybe this is a sounds like a whole episode in and of itself. So I apologize for giving you this loaded question here. But how do you find that spot, that mid spot?
I think it is always, at least for me, it's always been a pendulum.
Mm,
And there are seasons of life because how God is growing me in that season changes. And hopefully, those of you who have had a few seasons of life with Jesus, you're going to recognize and see this more than maybe people who are just starting their faith journey. But it is a pendulum, and it swings one way where I'm full of lots of grace. And then I learn something else and I swing too far the other way and I'm all truth, and that's not good either.
mm,
And the maturity in following Jesus comes when you are willing to live outside a black and white world and enter into the gray. And that is hard because you might not give the same answer to two people with the same situation. And it's because of all of the other stuff that comes with it. And it's like, hey, is that nuanced? Yeah. So is following and really living it out and not just paying it lip service. I
mm,
think if the answer comes too easy, you probably aren't close enough to the problem, or you haven't
mm,
personalized it enough. And giving credit where credit is due. I learned that from Mark White, our fearless leader. He said that in a message years ago, and that has just stuck in my gut like, oh, I can't get rid of it because it applies to so many different things in our lives. This being one of them, the holier than thou aspect of what you mentioned, John, I feel like that comes out when I narrow the list of sins and evils that I can commit to be something that is too small versus God, like anytime we miss his mark, it is sin.
Mm.
And so it's like, where can I go back and look at a list of the 7 deadly sin? Like look up what actually is covered. And you're telling me you have none of those in your life. I highly doubt it. And, we're sitting here as two pastors saying, yeah, sign us up. We're on the sin bus and we don't like it. We work to fix it. But that keeps my pendulum locked more in the middle
Mm.
versus veering off one way or the other. So I think you got to be in God's word and remember it's his standard of what is right, not yours. And that keeps the humility in check as well. And then just the maturity of knowing, look, you're going to have seasons where he's growing different pieces of you, and that's a part of the process. And you might bend one way or the other because of what you're learning. And if you make a mistake with somebody, you got to go fix it. And in
Yeah.
humility, again, hopefully you have grace extended to you, and that's okay. But we want to be honest and confess that to each other when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, that element of, I think, recognizing that we love to compare, and
Mm-hmm.
we love, especially when we feel like we can minimize the things that we do wrong in terms of how important, throwing the air quotes again. Sorry, listeners. We are, we love to minimize our own things, right? And I think that there's something very humbling about, okay, recognizing in ourselves, yes, I do things wrong. I make mistakes. I sin. And like, I love that you said, keep that pendulum, try your best to keep that pendulum in the middle, because it is that I think when you are able to have grace with yourself, it's not recognizing that there's nothing there. It's
Yeah.
saying, hey, there are things that are there that God is helping me heal from, that God is working me through. And I feel like it's only when we're able to like actually see that we're able to extend that to others. Because if we're just hiding our own stuff, then it's like, then if we see anything in anybody else, it's like, well, I mean, I don't have anything, right? So,
Well, so here's the crazy thing about favoritism, to take what you're saying and kind of like go to the next level, right? When we say it's favoritism and we don't want to admit that we do it, it is favoritism not just with people, but the tools we use to judge ourselves and other people, meaning I am willing to bet you play favorites on which sins you really think are sins that need
mm,
to be apologized for and repented from versus the sins you kind of just forgive yourself for. That's why I'm saying the other part of this, it's relational for sure, like we've been talking about with the people and the trust. But the other piece of this is like it's the holy work that only God can do to enforce his standard in your head and your heart. And he doesn't play favorites with sin. It is,
mm,
if you're missing his expectation in your life, it is all the same. And oh, I'm getting goosebumps as I talk about it, right? God must be trying to tell me that there's something I need to work on. But but really it's so you see, like we think a rom-com's just a rom-com and it's fluffy. But this idea is so deep and it's got
mm,
so many layers in our hearts and souls if we are willing to be the onion and let him peel it back. But you have to be a willing participant, right? You have to be willing to ask him to like reveal to you where that's showing up in places you don't currently see, because we all have blind spots and that's where we
mm.
need his help.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe the most practical thing you can do if you're listening right now, you're watching right now, and you're like, okay, I want to work on this. Maybe I don't even know where I have this, and maybe you do know, is to do that self reflection and really spend a little bit more time being like, hey, what is God asking me to work on? Um, and if you're not sure, I'm sure there are some people in your life that you can ask, and they'll
Yeah.
help you out there. Uh, okay, so one of the big things that you mentioned in order to fight this and was to really start seeing people and ourselves in a different light, and that's the understanding that we're made in the image of God. Uh, and I love that you use the Imago Dei. The seminary student in me was so happy to hear that. um, and but that's a hard thing to do, right? And I'm curious, is there anything that we can do to help see that even in ourselves? Because I think it starts there. Because I
Mhm.
think once we're willing to see it in ourselves, we're willing to start to see it in others. But
Yeah, in the actual message in the movie, we really got to just scratch the surface. So, we looked at the verses in Genesis where we actually affirm that that's what God was doing when he created mankind. So not just Adam and Eve, but all of us. But then to your point, how do you start living that out or investigating what that could look like to live that out? My best advice would be to learn more about who God is and to examine what traits he shows us in his word, and where has he shown up in your own personal story? Who do you know him to be? And if you don't know enough about who he is, it is going to be really difficult to see him in who you are or who you are desiring to become. So I think, again, it's to be in his word. And there are devotionals on the characteristics of God all over the place. This is a good teeing up of our digital pastor to like link something in the comments below, right? Insert
And
for
we will
you.
link things in the description.
I'm giving you homework.
Yeah.
But like honestly, like you could do a week-long devotional on the characteristics of God and come away with a different understanding and appreciation for who he is. But then what an honor that those things then are also supposed to be things that we ideally see in ourselves.
Mm,
And that really makes you, again, humble, but then to start challenging yourself. Am I trying and seeking after the right traits in my life? Am I trying um, to exemplify that, not just so that I know I have it, but so that the people around me experience his love and me being present with them and me seeing them more like he sees them. And I think that's definitely got to be a learned practice. I mean, it's inherently in us. So if you are not following Jesus already, uh, it's there. You might have a longing for it and not know what it is. For those of us who are already followers, this is a chance where we get to know more about our dad, right? Our Abba Father, and then go, wow, he's pretty cool. Like if you have little children, they kind of look up to their parents and think their parents are so cool and the smartest people. And there's that awe and wonder when a kid sees one of their parents do something remarkable.
mm,
This is a moment where we get to investigate and really seek out something new and learn something about our Heavenly Father so that we have a renewed awe and wonder for who he is and the kindness he offers when he says he makes us in his image.
mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I've heard described before that you you can start to see the characteristics of God in others, um, and it's almost like, because I think we're all, we all have our own gifts, and I think we different people illustrate certain things a little bit strongly, like maybe some of
Sure.
the characteristics of God in more powerful ways. And everyone has, I think, slightly different skewing in that, right? And so it's almost like you can begin, once you study and see, okay, God is this. How can I see some of that in this person?
Mm-hmm.
And it almost is a chance to learn. It's almost like a reciprocal thing where you then start to learn a little bit more about God through seeing those qualities in other people. Um, but one of the things you said that was super interesting, Jodi, is talking about how um, we value different qualities differently. Um, and if we're seeing certain things, if we're valuing maybe qualities that we think are the best things, but they're actually not, like maybe it's ambition or something like that, or it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, does God really showcase that specific quality? And are we prioritizing and valuing the wrong things? Um, I don't know if there's a question there, but
No, I think I mean, I will just interject enough to say, I think you're spot on. That I feel like is the process we talk a lot about a faith journey at the Ridge. And if you are somebody who's been following Jesus for a while and you have been baptized and you're spending quiet time, like you feel like you check some boxes, right, on whatever this faith journey is. So you're not forgive the crass terminology, you're not a beginner Christian anymore. You've been following him for a season or two. um, what what does that mean for your journey? It means this: it is still a journey. It is going to continue to ebb and flow. And even if you've learned about the characteristics of God and what he values and how he sees us, you're in a different stage and season of life where every time you go back to that, he will awaken something new. That's why you hear sometimes people say God's word is living. Well, this is
Mm,
the part of it. It means really you're living around it, right? And walking through life. And then the journey is with him in his word. He'll call something out different, either in you or in his word that he wants you to pay attention to and grow through and grow from. Um, and whether it's in relation to how you're showing favoritism in people, or you have a blind spot that you need to correct, or maybe you learn something new, to your point, that you can appreciate in people who you had been judging harshly. Um, all of that, I think, can come, but you have to. This is where we actually have to be people who don't just know what Jesus knows. We have to do what he did.
mm,
And there is such a difference between knowing conceptually how we should love people versus actually doing it. And I'm a fan of, people say love is a verb. This is where we get to live that out and actually live it out with the people around us.
mm. And actually practice it,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
And heavy on the word practice, not perfection.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I think sometimes if you've been following Jesus for a while and you hear the word devotional, um, maybe you just kind of check out, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that sometimes you can, but I think that advice is so good, because I think it's like, hey, take a specifically targeted approach to doing something, to learning something, instead of accidentally learning things, which can be great. But I think that there's like that. I think that targeted approach can be really impactful. Um,
I think so. And it's like the concept of, hey, if somebody is brand new and has never learned who Jesus is or why he can matter in their life, and you get them willing to say they're willing to take one of the free Bibles we give away anytime people are with us in person, the first thing you're going to do is go, don't start at the beginning. Don't start in Genesis. That is a bad idea. It
yeah,
is not chronological. Like, start here instead, right? And you guide the beginning of their journey because you want them to get the most out of it. So
mm,
think about if you're past that. I guess what I'm saying is, don't don't just take it for granted. Think about what you want to get the most out of in the season that you're in, and then use that to target what you're learning, what you're studying, what you're praying and talking to him about. And then you will see different results. And the
mm,
journey will feel more like a journey. You're going to sense more movement
yeah,
and change in your life because you're being more intentional. And he wants to show up. He wants to help you continue to create life change. It isn't just you make a decision, you get dunked, and then you coast for the rest of your life.
yeah,
We're constantly evolving and growing. And when we add the intention in to say, hey, God, this idea is one that I need your help to grow through, man, he loves to show up. I just believe that all day long.
yeah. I mean, you talk about things you really need God's help to grow through. I think this is right up there,
Yeah.
because it's so. I feel like it's so natural to play favorites. I mean, one of the first things we learn to ask and answer is, "What's your favorite blank?"
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like we hardwire it into ourselves. Um, I'm just curious. So maybe as we wrap up, was there anything that you, because we're talking about movies, left on the cutting room floor that you were like,
Ah,
you edited it out, you cut it. You're like, oh, I really want this to work. I really want to use this line, but you had to cut it for time or whatever reason.
cut it for time or cut it for sensitivity. So I will, I will say this, but it's with trepidation, because I hope you hear, this is me saying, I hope you hear the heart in this, because I'm not going to take a stance on either side. I will just say this idea of favoritism and excluding those who don't meet whatever those qualifications are within your own mind is something that, whether you want to or not, you will see play out the closer we get to our election season in this country.
Mm,
And that means, are you going to start ostracizing certain friends? Are you going to start avoiding certain people at the office? Are you going to, like, maybe you've already done that. Now, there's healthy boundaries, right? And sometimes you need to get off social media or not look at certain things that just become a cesspool for you.
Mm.
And I use dramatic language because there's research that shows on social there are algorithms that specifically feed that to you. So those are healthy boundaries. I'm saying if God calls us to love everybody and to not play favorites, what does that mean for you in the season ahead? And if you aren't ready to handle that, this is a faith journey. And as long as you don't end up with Jesus in heaven between now and then, you're you're going to be living and you're going to go through this piece of your journey. So how can you prepare for it now so
Mm.
that you protect yourself and you protect your relationships in a God-honoring way, and you don't
Mm.
lose influence that you have in people's lives that can be pointed toward Jesus, pointed toward eternity, pointed toward the kingdom. Between here and there, it's going to get dicey. So I I on a regular basis now want to see myself in a posture of humility, asking God for wisdom, right? In conversations I choose to have and things I let slide. I ask him to reveal blind spots about favoritism things. Where do you really do you think you know best? And you may really have a strong opinion, but that doesn't mean you can't learn something from somebody who's different than you. So
Mm.
how does that impact each one of us as we walk through this season? Because it's going to be a journey, might be a little bit of a roller coaster. Uh, and if nothing else, I just think there's enough time between now and then that you can spend some time with him preparing.
Mm.
And in his kindness, I think if we go in with the humility of actually being willing to listen to what he says, he'll show up and reveal some of that to us.
Well, that was really good. Um, sad to hear that part got cut because that sounds, yeah. I think we
We
could
will
all
be
use.
talking more holistically about politics as things get closer. I'm
Yeah,
just saying the joy of that question from you right now, John, is this season is just beginning. And if
yeah,
you've got some heart work to do, begin the journey now. There's no reason to wait. You may save broken relationships later if you start doing the work now.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that prevented that they'll call it the preventative maintenance. Like, what do you do now to get yourself ready?
That's a
Because
that is it.
yeah. And you know what? We will have some links and helpful things and resources in the show notes in the description that you can
See, I
find.
knew
But
that digital pastor
yeah, there
was
it comes. Yeah.
actually good for something. He's there to link to all the things.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
Jodi, thank you so much for sharing. There's a lot of just really, I think, important and powerful stuff in this, and thank you for being willing to share some more on it, to give us some practical insight on what we can do to really kind of live more in line, just not kind of live more in line with how heaven is going to be, how God sees each and every one of us as equals. Um, and yeah, thank you.
well, who knew a rom-com was so deep? But glad for the opportunity, John. Thanks.